Groundhog Day. We're so happy to have our chat with two rabbis, Rabbi Zvi Kahn and Rabbi Barry Silver. And take it away, my fellow rabbis.
All right. Thank you very much, Sharon. Great to be here again with Rabbi Kahn. We have an exciting passage in the Torah this time called Yitro. And so I always let Rabbi Kahn begin, and I'm curious to see what his take on this, and then I'll share some of my views. So Rabbi Kahn, it's all yours.
Has not said anything, Gail?
Thank you, Rabbi Silver. Thank you, Sharon, and nice to be here as always. When people think about or talk about our Torah portion this week of Yitro, invariably they discuss the 10 Commandments, because what could be more, important than the 10 Commandments? However, I actually would like to talk about Yitro. The Torah portion is named after this man, Moses' father-in-law. And I think that itself is an important point to mention. The fact that one of the Torah portions is given the name of Yitro is very significant. Yitro, of course, was a non-Jew. The Torah tells us that he actually was an idolater in his country of Midian, and kind of a chief, Kohen Midian, a chief leader, which some take to mean a religious leader in that country. And so it's very important that the Torah says whatever his background was is not important to us, because he came to join the Jewish people, which is what is narrated in this week's Torah portion. He came to join the Jewish people and throw in his lot with us and to join them. And so not only do we see that Moses honored him and came out to greet him, but we also see that his advice was accepted. And to just tell that story very briefly, Moses used to judge the people, and Yitro came to see how that worked. And what he saw was Moses' long lines, Moses sitting there all day long, while long lines of people came to ask Moses questions and bring arguments and disputes in front of him. And he would listen to each one, and he would issue rulings and judgments. And at the end of the day, Yitro said to him, "This is not a good system. It's not good for you to be here all day out in the hot sun doing this. And it's not good for the people who have to wait so long to have an audience with you and to put their case in front of you. You ought to set up a system in which there are lots of judges, kind of a judicial system in which there are people to do things and handle things in each neighborhood, in each area of the camp. And only the most difficult and complicated questions would you have to deal with personally, if none of the other lower level judges could deal with it. Kind of a Supreme Court. Moses would be kind of an individual Supreme Court where only the top cases came to him. And Moses accepted that advice, which again, I think is really important and interesting, because it leads to a wonderful Jewish principle that's articulated by the Talmud, which is wherever wisdom comes from, we should accept it. We should accept wisdom and knowledge wherever it comes from. Moses could have said to his father-in-law, Dad, with all due respect, we don't need you, a foreigner and a non-Jew, to come tell us what to do. Moses could have found a nice way to say that, but that is not what Moses said. Moses said, that's wonderful advice. That makes perfect sense. And that's in fact the system that Moses instituted. So the idea of listening to other people, of paying attention to what they say and actually implementing it and following it, if it's good advice, if it's wise advice, comes right out of our Torah portion this week. And I think that's a lesson that is always relevant and always important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that is the remarkable part of the passage. And also that the 10 Commandments is named for someone who's non-Jewish, Yitro, indicating that these commandments and morality is not something that the Jews were supposed to just share with other Jews. This was meant for the world. And I do agree with you, Rabbi Kahn. It's a beautiful message that truth and understanding and dialogue should take place between all people. In my experience, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Orthodox today have completely shut the door on that lesson and really don't mix it up much at all with other people. Not only non-Jews, but even other Jews. They tend not to want to have much to do with Jews of other denominations or non-Jewish people for that matter. Many times they admonish people for working with other people, and they want to stay to themselves. So I think to me, in my experience, you're a rare exception, but I find that to be the case. I find that to be the case with most religions, but especially Orthodox Judaism seems kind of like a closed unit. I know that I've never, ever, ever been invited to speak at an Orthodox synagogue, share a thought with an Orthodox synagogue, or have anything to do with them, despite my efforts to build bridges with them. So maybe you could tell me if I'm wrong or what's going on. I would also like to just comment on the Torah passage that many things are mentioned for the first time in the Torah, and this time we see that the Beverly Hillbillies actually has its origins in the Torah, because the name Jethro, Jethro comes right out of this passage, Yitro. And then there's Eli May. Eli means my God, and May means the waters of. So my God is like waters, quenching my thirst. And so you also have the name of the name of Jed Clampett. I don't know if many people know this. His full name is Jedediah, which means that God is my friend, Yedidiah. So his name is pure Hebrew also. So the Beverly Hillbillies has its origins in the Torah and in this passage. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this is that I believe that the greatest miracle ever told in the Torah of all the miracles occurs in this passage, better than the parting of the sea and the plagues and all that stuff. Because in this passage, Moses' father-in-law gives him advice, and as Rabbi Kahn says, he accepts it. he doesn't say, who are you? You know, like, I know what I'm doing. I talk to God. You know, I'm in communication with God. I don't need you to tell me what to do. He takes his advice and accepts it fully. And it's really, you could say it's kind of like the beginnings of democracy. Instead of Moses being an autocrat and just making all the decisions, he divides up his power and shares it with other people. So it's kind of the beginnings of a democratic system. And it's a really great passage. And I think it's great. By the way, the 10 Commandments, it's kind of interesting. I guess it's I see my role in life is to point out hypocrisies and find out what people are doing that are wrong so that we can try to make them better. So you got these Christian fundamentalists, and they're all running around saying, we have to go back to the 10 Commandments. We need to put the 10 Commandments in the schools. They ought to be in the courtrooms. They should be in the Capitol, all over the way. Let's put the 10 Commandments. Do they follow them? No. Isn't there a commandment that says, like, you shall have no other gods before me? And I think that is, Jesus is a God that they place before the Father. He's like the intermediary. So they violate that commandment. And the commandments say that God is one. And the commandments say that you should observe the Sabbath on the seventh day. Not only that, if you don't observe it on the seventh day, the penalty is execution. So if you do all the right things, but on the wrong day, you're still executed. It doesn't matter. But the Christians don't even come close to observing any of the rules of the Sabbath. And even if they did, it's on the wrong day. So if they really wanted to implement biblical law and the 10 Commandments, they'd all be executed on the spot. So it's very interesting that they love the 10 Commandments as far as everybody else should do them, but they don't follow them at all. Another commandment is to honor your father and mother. And they certainly don't honor the mother faith of Christianity, which is Judaism. They certainly have failed miserably in doing that. So rather than tell everybody else what to do, maybe they should try to keep the commandments themselves. One other thing about the commandments that are interesting, there's two different versions, which leads radicals like me to believe that it's not God written, that some people wrote it and got it mixed up. Also, Jethro has about 7 different names in the Torah. He's called Yitro and Putiel and all types of other names, Hobab, Yeter. It's got all these different names, which leads rational observers to say that there's an oral tradition and they got it mixed up a little bit. But the passage shows the 10 Commandments with 2 different versions in it. But both versions say this: no person is punished for the sins of the father, and God only remembers the sins of fathers for 3 generations. That just wiped out original sin with Adam. So their whole religion is based on the original sin of Adam. The Ten Commandments repudiates it and says that the God doesn't remember sins past 3 generations. So we're not responsible for original sin whatsoever, which kind of makes sense. In any event, Rabbi Kahn, maybe you could respond to my my observation in the beginning and anything else that you care to respond to.
Sure. I think your point about the Orthodox community, you know, I would say that in any system, in any religious system, if you have people who are trying very hard to maintain and keep to a certain tradition and a certain set of beliefs and activities, it is harder for them to be fully assimilated in and part of and accepting in all of the kind of parts of the modern contemporary culture that they might be located in, because, you know, because then it's harder to kind of focus on what you're doing in your traditions if you're a part of that. So I do believe there's a certain amount of, I might call, natural resistance in the Orthodox community to just kind of saying, let's be a part of everything that's going on in society, as opposed to saying, let's be selective. The Orthodox community, the way I understand it, the Orthodox Jewish community tries to be selective in the sense of saying, let's look at everything, that all the culture and the world around us, and those things that we think are valuable, those things that we think are important, those things that we think are worthy, those things that we think are necessary. Yes, they can kind of come in. It's semi-permeable, and those things that we think should be kept out. And there are a lot of things in this world that I think it is important to keep out, the same way we might think of protecting our children from certain of negative influences. So we get that same idea. The Orthodox community wants to say, you know, there's a lot out there we want to protect ourselves from.
So
but
I guess I fall into that category of things they want to protect themselves from.
I would never say that.
I would definitely say that. I think they definitely want to protect themselves from my ideas. I find that I have a brother who's in a cult, and I find that they operate the same way. They don't like anybody else coming in because they're trying to program people to think a certain way. And if people come in from the outside, they might give them something else to think about. And it kind of interferes with any type of indoctrination. So I find that to be a rather, it's like a red flag to me when people don't want to talk to others and don't want to hear other opinions and don't want to engage in dialogue. It seems to me like a red flag, like there's something going on there that's not very healthy.
So just to respond to that, I hope I wasn't so, you know, inarticulate that I made it seem like a kind of a cult environment. The Orthodox community that I'm a part of is extremely engaged in the world around them and every conceivable profession that you might want to name, and every, you know, walk into any grocery store, walk into any, you know, back before the virus, into movie theaters, wherever, and to the library, wherever you want to go. Very engaged and very involved in modern culture, but yes, with an idea of there are things out there that we don't want to copy and that we don't want to emulate. As a matter of fact, the Orthodox community looks out and with pride on the fact that it has a set of traditions and beliefs that it wants to protect, that it believes are worthy of protecting, and it does view that as an important thing. I do want to skip ahead to the last thing you mentioned, Rabbi, and that is honor one's parents and the 10 Commandments. I think if a person reads the 10 Commandments, they really need to be struck and find it remarkable and take a moment of pause about that commandment, because the other commandments one can kind of immediately accept and embrace as being, as you said, being universal, as being fundamental moral principles. All of a sudden you read honor one's parents and you think to yourself, honor one's parents, is that really on the same level as belief in God, or not to murder? Is that really a fundamental? And Judaism says, yes, that is a fundamental principle that everyone must embrace. That our parents brought us into this world, that we would not exist if it was not for them. And in a certain way, it's a stepping stone to honoring God. When we honor our parents, we say, we realize we weren't here always. We came from somewhere. We were created. We were brought into this world by our parents in a similar way that human beings in general were brought into this world by God. And so it's a fundamental principle in Judaism to respect and honor one's parents. And I think that really deserves a lot of attention. And I think it's always been a hallmark of Jewish community, is a tremendous respect and taking care and nurturing of the parents.
Yeah, I agree with you. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think in the two different versions of the commandments, and one time it says honor your father and mother. Then in the other one it says honor your mother and father. I think the mother comes first in one and the father in the other. I think, but I'm not sure about that. Do you know if that's accurate?
Yes, the language actually changes a little bit in several different cases in the two sets of the Ten Commandments. And I believe what you might be referring to is the fact in one place it says, honor your father and your mother. And in the other, it says your mother and your father you should fear or you should have respect for. And so the verb changes and the order of the parents change in terms of that, which is kind of interesting, and interesting interpretations or interesting explanations have been offered for that. But yes.
Yeah. I agree with you that the honoring of a parent is something that is very significant. And I go even further and say, I think that's why Judaism is still around and why we're very successful. You know, like a lot of non-Jewish parents, it's like the kids turn 18 and they're like, whoopee, I finally got rid of my kids. Have a good life, best of luck. Let me know when you're getting married. Jewish parents aren't like that at all. Jewish parents are like, hey, where are you going? You know, what's going on here? I thought you were my kid. You're leaving me already. And they're always involved in their kid's life. They're always your parent. And I think that's very healthy, because I think kids need to be guided. Even after 18, there might be a few things left that they could learn. And I think that Judaism does has a very healthy respect for parents and grandparents, because we value wisdom and knowledge and love. And those things are, the parents are the repository of those. If I was going to write the commandments, and I know from your perspective, I could never approve upon it because these are written by God, but if I was going to write the commandments, I would have put something like, honor your parents if they're good people. I mean, not every parent is a role model of virtue. I mean, some parents are doing some really pretty despicable things. So it might have been nice if you said, honor your parents if they're doing good things, but it's a good, I like the sentiment to honor your parents. I think that's very, very healthy. Maybe we could open up to other people if they wanted to share some thoughts about the commandments or what's going on in the world. Go ahead, Emily.
Mute, take yourself off mute.
Unmute yourself.
Sydney, I just sent you a message on chat with the phone number for you got it to get a COVID shot. Okay, that was
Okay, so no comment on the Torah. Okay.
No, well, comment on the Torah and cult. It's disturbing to me to see the pictures in Israel of the thousands of people going to the funeral of the rabbi that died, flocking there without masks, despite the fact that Israel has been trying very hard to eradicate the virus. And I kind of put that into the cult status. What do you guys think about that?
I'm sorry, Rabbi, please go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Let me jump in. There's tremendous internal controversy right now inside of the Orthodox community, because so many people within the Orthodox community are looking at what's happening in Israel in that particular example, and they're saying, of course, it's a wonderful thing to pay tribute to these great rabbis who passed away, and under normal circumstances, to have 10,000 people come out and march the funeral procession is a beautiful thing to honor the religious leaders of the community. However, when you endanger everyone who's there and you endanger everyone else in the country and you undermine the efforts of Israel, which is fighting so hard, as you said, to vaccinate ahead of everybody else and to really deal with take on the coronavirus in a serious way, that's tremendously problematic. And everyone is, so many people in the Orthodox community are saying, how is that community, those people, how are they forgetting the law of protecting one's health, which is a commandment in the Torah? That is a command in the Torah that we must protect our health and take care of ourselves and the health, of course, of other people as well. So that's a tremendous debate right now and controversy that's going on. And so many people, so many rabbis have come out and said, do not get together in these groups, even if it's a funeral procession, wherever you are, wear a mask. And unfortunately, sometimes it's hard to get that message across or get to the point where everyone accepts it, and they kind of take a specific aspect of religious tradition and focus on that to the exclusion of other elements in the religious tradition, and that's a problem. It's a very.
Why do you think that happens in the Orthodox community? You don't see that happening in Reform or Reconstructionists. Why in the Orthodox community? What's your speculation about that?
I think that the role of the rabbi or of the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the academy, the religious leader is a much more highly revered kind of position that would be different than, let's say, outside of the ultra Orthodox community. So right off the bat, there is this intense feeling of, it would be kind of a travesty not to attend this man's funeral. How can we allow him to have a funeral with just, let's say, 5 people at it, just his immediate family, when he's a great leader? He's been a great leader for all these years, a great religious scholar, et cetera, and that would somehow be, such an act of disrespect to him and to his memory that we can't allow that to happen. And that's a very powerful, I think what we have to realize, if we want to try and at least understand it a little bit, not to agree with it or support it, is this powerful feeling of, we can't allow this man to go to his grave unescorted and unrespected, and it would be, we can't do that. Now, on the other hand, the answer is yes, you can do that, and the reason to do it is because of your health and the health of other people, and you need to put the needs of the community's health above that. But that's not always easy to get across to people.
Are they able to Zoom that service? I know on Shabbat you don't use Zoom, but could they Zoom the funeral service?
Absolutely. The funeral services, are always filmed and could be filmed, and people could watch it that way. Now, I will say this, in the ultra-Orthodox community, it is not uncommon at all for people not to have computers and not to have access to Zoom. So for many people in that community, unless you physically are there, you would not be able to watch it or see it, because you wouldn't have a television at home, and you wouldn't even have a computer at home to Zoom it. So some people, obviously thousands of people, felt like they had to be there, but that was a terrible, terrible mistake.
Go ahead, Sharon.
So just to kind of piggyback on that, a couple of things. One, Emily and you were both saying that they weren't wearing any masks. So
I wouldn't use the word piggyback when you're talking to the Orthodox.
I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry. Okay.
just say to follow up on it.
Follow up. Okay, I'm following up. Okay, so they weren't wearing masks. So if they were to do this, okay, so the Jewish guilt comes out that they have to do this for their great rabbi who's served them well, etc. But what's the issue with wearing a mask? Likewise, in New York City somewhere, so far that I know of, there's been at least 2 weddings where there's been, I think, 10,000 people at each wedding. We saw it on the internet. They got fined afterwards, I think $5,000 or $10,000. They were all dancing and right up against each other with their fur hats and the whole ganze Geschichte, and no masks, of course, and they were fined afterwards. So, okay, I can understand a funeral and their great leader and all that, but yes, you can do it and you can still wear a mask. What's the problem with that? You can talk through a mask. It's not going to hinder your praying or your talking. So there's no excuse for that as far as I'm concerned. And why would they have these flourishing, expensive, extravagant weddings and invite 10,000 people and totally contradict the whole COVID thing? So I don't understand that either. So
I think that, and I see Joel wants to, I just am going to jump in, and then I don't want to monopolize the conversation. The huge weddings that happened in New York, it's interesting to kind of connect to what happened in Israel, even though it's the opposite end of the spectrum on the life cycle when celebrating a wedding and going to at a funeral. However, there is a connection there, and that is that those weddings that happened in New York were the children or grandchildren of some of the great rabbinic leaders of those communities. So again, you had this emotional, powerful feeling of, this isn't just any wedding, this is a wedding of our community leader. We have to go, we have to be a part of it, and we have to celebrate. There's another piece of it, which is, and again, it's just unfortunate and it's sad, And that is in some parts of the ultra-Orthodox community, there's this idea that if we're doing God's will, then we'll be protected and nothing's going to happen to us. So therefore, yes, there's COVID, yes, there's a virus, but we've been through, Jews often say, we've been through so much already. This is not going to be the thing this won't be the thing that's going to get us. Well, unfortunately, it does sometimes happen. And there's a very famous picture of two well-known rabbis in a certain Hasidic movement who were at a wedding, and there's pictures of them at the wedding shaking hands and hugging each other. Both of them ended up dying from the COVID virus.
Oh my God.
Many people have taken that picture and tried to spread it within the ultra-Orthodox community, saying, we lost these people, we lost these rabbis who people knew of. They were writers, they were authors, they were well-known speakers. We lost them. They died of COVID. Get your head out of the sand and realize COVID can kill you. COVID will kill you. And some of us will be killed because of these big meetings. But these are powerful forces that it's hard to work against sometimes. Joel, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Joel, we can't hear you. Joel, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. We don't hear you. No voice. No.
He doesn't
No
see
speaker. No speaker.
He's not muted.
No, he's not muted, but his microphone is not working.
Oh.
So I have another question while he's trying to fix
Well,
himself.
I wanted to address that question first.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think we're ignoring the elephant in the room. And the elephant is a symbol for the Republican Party. So the president has been poo-pooing masks and saying, don't worry about COVID and it's all a hoax and stuff like that. And many right-wing Jews are very loyal supporters of the president. So I think they're under his sway and under his influence. You have to look at it not in isolation, but just in general. In general, Trump supporters have minimized the risk of COVID, as the president did, and discouraged use of a mask. So it's not surprising that people who are aligned with the president would do this. In addition to all the other things that Rabbi Kahn is saying, which I agree with. They have this reverence for the rabbi that's like way over the top. And so they want to show the respect. And they also, like Rabbi Kahn says, they think, well, I'm doing God's work, so God's going to watch out for me. And if he doesn't watch out for me, they have an answer for that too. Well, if the rabbis died, then no big deal. They're going up to heaven and they're going to be with God anyway. So they're better off dead because now they're in paradise with God because they were at a holy event and doing a holy thing. So who cares? It's like once you're not thinking rationally, anything goes. Now, I just also wanted to say one other thing about the parents. It does say in the Torah that you should fear your parents, but sometimes it's translated revere your parents. And the word in Hebrew for to fear and revere, yirah, originally Jewish people feared God. And then that word kind of evolved as our thoughts towards God evolved. And then we didn't fear so much, but we revered. And the same thing is true with parents. Some people fear their parents, and that's not a good thing. That should evolve into reverence for your parents and reverence for this power within us that can change the world for the better. I do feel a little bad because all the questioning and all the observations have seemed to go in one direction. And for our guest, Rabbi Kahn. So I do feel bad about that. So if anyone has any comments directed towards me, I'll be glad. I'll be glad to respond. I don't like seeing everything one-sided. So if somebody wants to, you can hit me with your best shot, and let's even it out a little bit. I see a new person also, Leah.
Hi, Leah.
Welcome. Hi, Leah. Welcome.
Welcome, Leah. What do you think about all this? Do you have anything you want to share?
She just came. Leah, you
Putting
can
her
take
on the spot. Putting her on
All
the
right,
spot.
listen a little bit, and then you can share your observations.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Thanks for being here, Leah. Rabbi, I have a question for you, Rabbi Barry.
Make it a good one.
When you were doing your little summary, you used the word they over and over and over. Who is they that you're talking about? You said they do this and they do that and they do this. Who is the they for Rabbi Barry when you were doing your little dissertation before?
I mean, just now when I was talking about they,
No, earlier when you were talking about, I think you were talking about Christians as being they, but I don't know. So
if you remember what I said they were doing, I could tell you who they are. I don't remember. You mean in the beginning of this discussion?
Said you were talking about the 10 Commandments.
Right. Oh, right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the right-wing fundamentalist Christians. Right. That's what I'm talking about. They're really big on putting the 10 Commandments all over the place, in the schools, in the courtroom, in the government complexes, which is a clear violation of the First Amendment, the separation of church and state. There's no doubt about it. It's a clear violation. But they use the 10 Commandments like a wedge. They want to clobber you over the head with it. They want to impose, this is their way of putting their stamp on it. Like when a dog has to pee on a fire hydrant. It's like, we own this place now. This is our place. We're declaring this in our name. But when they do it, they want the 10 Commandments there, but they don't even know what the 10 Commandments says, and they don't follow the 10 Commandments. It's hypocrisy in the extreme to suggest that we should put the 10 Commandments out there, and they don't even follow it. And I would also say this:
okay,
if you claim that you follow the 10 Commandments and you think it's God's word, then you better learn Hebrew so you can read the original instead of somebody else's translation. I mean, if I thought that the Torah or Scripture was God's word, I would learn the language that God speaks. I wouldn't be following somebody else's translation of it. But I will say this just to balance it out, that there's a lot of hypocrisy in all the different religions. And I would say that Judaism has launched a substantial amount of it. And a big part of the problem is this chosen people concept, that God chose Jews and then gave them license to exterminate other people. That concept then spread to Christians and Muslims who said, yeah, you're right, God, but God chose us now because he's done with you. You guys blew it. You messed up. You got rid of Jesus, or you didn't accept the Quran and you made a mistake. So he's done with you now. You're expendable. Now it's our turn. Now we're the chosen. That's called replacement theology. And it takes a Jewish concept, which is, I think, very odious, and it now uses it against us. And I think we do well as Jews just to repudiate the whole thing and say, if there is a creative power out there responsible for all of this, which I believe there is, then this power is far bigger than Jews or Christians or Muslims or whites or blacks or even humans or dogs or cats or plants. I mean, if there's a creative power responsible for all of this, that power is infused and loves everything and everyone of every race and creed. It doesn't just single out, oh, I just created this entire universe in the cosmos for human beings, and only those particular human beings that believe in me. That's why I created everything. It's an irrational concept, and that's why I think we need a bigger view of God than something like that. Go ahead, Sid.
Joel, go ahead, because
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I don't know if it was covered or not because I had to leave the room and get my earphones. Anyways, it's upsetting, especially in New York, because I get the news on New York. It's upsetting that to respect one person or a few people and disrespect many, there's a measuring device. Our religion doesn't teach us that, because that's not, the love and everything we're supposed to show. And a good example was the two rabbis that passed away. And that's the ones that we know about. We don't know how many others were affected by this, which may not have passed away, but have got the disease and suffered for it. And this is not only in our religion right now, but we have the same situation politically, where these people that went into the Capitol, there were no masks. They had no intent. They didn't care. They didn't give a darn. I didn't use the bad one. They didn't give a darn. They just did what they wanted to do. And they're not alone. They're not alone, because some of our politicians are doing the same thing. They front that they weren't going to wear a mask. And one of our leaders, who's not our leader anymore, thank God, he didn't wear a mask. He didn't want to wear a mask. You didn't have to wear a mask. It's a hoax. Everything's a hoax. The problem was he was the biggest hoax. So the situation is, how do you measure that? Because in our teachings, beyond even the Torah, in many of the other books and learnings, we don't preach that you make, because you want to be happy with one person, you want to make everybody else unhappy. We don't teach that. And how can they get away with it? They call themselves learned men, that they got their heads in the Bible all day, in the Torah all day long, studying and davening and the whole schmitzik. And I was there, and I know. So it doesn't make sense. And that is the problem. That is the problem we're confronted with.
And Joel, there's an easy explanation for it. The person you're responsible for, who's no longer our leader, tried to sow mass confusion.
Very good, Barry.
And the other thing that he did was he tried to convince people that the mask would emasculate people, and that if you wear a mask, you're somehow effeminate. And so he discouraged the use of a mask. The sad thing is that even though he's no longer in power, his thinking still holds sway with a lot of people, and we have a lot of work to do in order. And what you're saying, Joel, I agree with you about people who are very learned and have their head in the books, as you say. I have a lot of respect for people who are so sincere and devout that they want to make religion their whole life, and they spend their life devoted to it. I don't casually dismiss that. I think I respect people like that. I might not agree with them, but I respect it. But I do believe that they're not seeing the big picture about Judaism. For me, Judaism has two main objectives, which both of them have to be observed. Emet vatzedek, truth and righteousness. If you don't have truth, you can't be righteous. So if you believe that wearing a mask is not going to help you, or that the coronavirus is not a problem, if you believe that and you don't know the truth about it, you can't be righteous, because you're going to make decisions that are going to be harmful. You're going to say, I need to revere this person, and this isn't an issue because I've been told it's not. And so it's not that they're bad people. It's not that they're not sincere people. It's that they don't have a handle on emet. And in order to have a handle on emet, you have to embrace science. If you reject science and reject science about coronavirus or evolution or anything else, if you reject science, you reject truth. And if you reject truth, you're operating in falsehood. And if you operate in falsehood, you can't be righteous, because you don't have the tools to know what's righteous and not. And I think that's what the problem is. And that's why at L'Dor Va-Dor, we make a valiant effort to try to approach truth, which is accomplished by talking to everybody and getting all types of opinions and then coming up with what the truth is. Now, Leah, I am going to ask you to introduce your guest. Who do you have there with you?
Oh, look at him. What a big boy.
What's his name?
He's adorable.
Darrell. Baby
Darrell.
Darrell.
Baby
Darrell,
Darrell.
how you doing? Darrell.
He just keeps coming and running back and forth. Cartoon. He's watching cartoons. He comes back and forth.
What does he like to do?
Beautiful.
What does he like to do?
He likes to read. He's 2 years old. And
Yeah.
he loves his alphabets and numbers, and he's always trying to learn. He's always trying to learn how to configure them into words.
That's great at
That's
2.
awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Very good.
Good for you. Good for you promoting that.
And I do have a question for you.
Go ahead, Sid.
You kept talking about the 10 Commandments, but somewhere along the line in my education, I was told that was the remainder of the 4 tablets that came down, and there were a lot more than 10 on the 4 tablets. Can you help us to understand that?
Yeah, of course. That's the easy one. When Moses came down, I think I've said this before. When Moses came down, he said to the Jewish people, I got good news and bad news. The good news is I bargained God down to only 10 commandments. but the bad news is that adultery is still in. So the commandments, actually, there's more than 10, and Rabbi Kahn can verify this, but our ancestors liked round numbers, so they came up with 10, but they kind of put a few of them together and come up with one. And, you know, you can't have any other gods before me, and you should revere the Lord your God, and I am the Lord. But like the first one isn't even a commandment. It just says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. That's not a commandment. It's a declaration. And then they stick 3 of them together. So it's not really commandments. But I will notice something interesting. I'm curious to get Rabbi Kahn's take on this. But if you look at the 10 commandments, what you see is a duplication of the Assyrian vassal king relationship reflected in the 10 commandments. So at that time period, the Assyrians and the Babylonians were the main powers, and they had a relationship in which the king would establish a covenant with his vassals. And the covenant went like this: you guys all support me, and if I need help, you support me, and you give me your troops, and you give me some of your food and some of your possessions, and let me use some of your soldiers. And in return, if anybody messes with you, I'll be there and I'll protect you. And if you have a famine or something bad happens, I'll provide for you. So we're all in a pact together. We're all going to support me, and I'll support you. But if you cross me, or if you fight for someone else, a different king, your history, I'll destroy you. And the first part of it says, I am, and it announces the name of the vassal, of the king. And then it announces the name of the other people, like we would do in a modern contract. Then it spells out the terms of the contract. And then it says what's going to happen if you mess with him and if you violate it. And the 10 commandments fits that. I am the Lord your God. You are the children of Israel. Here's all the rules. And then it says, and if you don't do these rules, watch out. It fits the Assyrian king-vassal relationship. So historians and scholars believe that Jewish people patterned this after the relationship that they saw with the most powerful figure that they could imagine. That was the king, or the leader in the vassal state. So it bears a remarkable resemblance to it. Rabbi Kahn, do you want to comment on, do you think it's just a coincidence, or is there something more to it?
I'd love to comment on a couple of things, but I see
Go
Paul
ahead.
hand up, so let's let Paul comment. Yeah, there you go.
Just a couple of comments on the issue of the parents. It always struck me on that particular passage that it doesn't, you talked about reverence, but what struck me is that it doesn't say to love your parents. It doesn't say to revere your parents. It says just respect them. That's all. I'm not expecting miracles here. You know, you can have really crappy parents, as some of us have had. And yet, so in some ways, I view that passage as not so much for my parents, but for me, a way of internalizing my relationship to myself and that long lineage that came before me. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was those first 2 statements that we're confronted with that are so much different than the other, 8, which are not so much rules of governance, but rather rules of human behavior. It's not a constitution, as I've heard people talk about in the past, that this is the Jewish constitution. It's not at all, but those first 2 statements, as a more secular person, I like to see them in a different light, as not so much the commandments of some egotistical autocrat, but as a kind of statement first of an ideal that I can internalize, a kind of ideal or logos that we may call God. And from that, it's within me that the other things come forth, like how I act towards others, whether it's my parents or my neighbor or not murdering somebody. And so I'm just, curious how you guys might see it from that perspective. As I say, not as a statement of some egotistical autocrat, the Lord, but rather as how I can internalize it myself as being part of me,
Rabbi Khan, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm going to circle back, if it's okay, to a couple of things we touched upon. First and foremost, I want to make a correction because I misspoke before about the commandment, the language in the Torah about honoring one's parents. In both presentations of the 10 Commandments, the one in this week's Torah portion of Yitro and the one that comes much, much later in the last book of the Torah in Deuteronomy, it says the exact same language. It says, honor your father and your mother. When Rabbi Silver asked about the change of the order of the putting the mother first, that's an entirely different verse that actually comes from the third book of the Torah, not part of the 10 Commandments, where it says a person should, a man and a woman, it puts the man first, a man and a woman should revere or feed his father and his mother. It puts the father first. So in the 10 Commandments, though, even though there are some differences between the two presentations, the issue of honoring the parents is both time it puts the honor your mother and your father, it uses the same language. So just to clear that up. The second thing is, one of the very important questions about the 10 Commandments is, what exactly are they intended to mean if there are so many other commandments in the Torah? As Rabbi Silver alluded to a few moments ago, throughout the book of the Torah, there are hundreds of commandments, and they are not part of the 10 Commandments. As a matter of fact, our great ancient rabbis counted them all and came up with the number 613. 613 separate, independent commandments are given to the Jewish people in the Torah. So the question that arises is, well, if there are 613 commandments, what are these 10 commandments? What makes them special? What makes them different? Are we supposed to do all of these things? And if we're supposed to do all of these things, why are we talking about these 10 commandments? And one of the very just kind of, I think, simple, basic answers to that question is to say that at this moment of the Jewish people coming to Mount Sinai and God revealing his presence and existence to them and sharing with them commandments, God's goal, his intention wasn't, let me give you all of the commandments that are ever going to exist. It was, let me give you 10 fundamental principles, so to speak, of the commandments. And there are even as early as 1,000 years ago, a little older than that, there were scholars and rabbis who showed how you could take the 10 commandments as categories and fit in all of the other 613 commandments slot them into one of those of the 10 commandments. So it's kind of interesting, I think, to think about the 10 commandments, not just as individual 10 laws, but as categories that all of the other commandments relate to in some way. In terms of the comment, Paul, that you made about the the idea of God and the relationship, I want to respond really in an affirmative way and say that I think everything in Judaism is about the relationship, the loving relationship between God and his creatures. And the reason God created people and human beings, along with everything else in the world, is out of that loving relationship for life to exist in this world. And God wants us to lead successful, good, healthy lives. And the commandments and the ideas and the philosophies expressed in the Torah, I think, move us in that direction. Obviously, as we've talked about tonight, there are people who get confused. There are people who make mistakes. We're all fallible. We all make mistakes. We put too much emphasis in one area, and we don't put enough understanding and effort into understanding how things balance and fit together. But I definitely agree with the basic concept that you articulated.
I wanted to respond to him also. I would like to mention, though, before we lose any people, that we're having a great event on February 20. We're going to bring the Black and Jewish communities together for a special Shabbat and celebrating Black History Month, and it's going to be wild. We're going to do things like we're going to sing the Jewish and the Israeli and the Black national anthem and have everybody sing together, and we shall overcome. We're planning a big event, so put it in your calendar. Now, let me talk about,
With masks and social distancing.
yes, it's going to be outside and there's going to be mass and social distancing. Let
I
me
thought
talk.
it was the 13th, Rabbi.
No,
moved.
it's on February 20th at 10:30 a.m.
Yeah,
That's
John
when
Prince
we
Park. All
reserve
right.
in John Prince Park.
Now, let me respond to that question also, or the comment. I happen to agree also that this relationship in the Ten Commandments between God and human beings is very, very significant. But there's something very interesting about it. It says, God says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. God isn't saying that he's the only God around. He's not saying that other gods don't exist. He's acknowledging that there are other gods, but he's saying, don't put them before me, I'm first. If God wanted to, or the Ten Commandments wanted to, it could have said, there are no other gods, I'm the only one. But it doesn't say that. It says, don't put other gods before me. So he's acknowledging other gods, which means that, in my opinion, Judaism has evolved. When this was written, Jews believed in something that we call henotheism, which means that the Greeks and Romans saw gods were everywhere. They were in everything. And then they came to a conclusion that there were certain gods that were more powerful than others. And that was, you see that on Mount Olympus and Apollo. And then Judaism took that another step further and said, no, there's not a whole bunch of gods like a pantheon. There's just one God who's more powerful. That's Yahweh. He's the most powerful of all, and everybody else is subservient. And then maybe centuries later, Jews evolved to say, by the way, there's not even any other gods, it's just him. It was an evolution. This reading of the Ten Commandments supports that when it says you shouldn't have other gods before me. Now also, the concept that was expressed that loving God is something that's really important, and that's part of what Judaism's all about. And Rabbi Kahn articulates that very well. I believe this concept is paramount in Judaism. The entire religion of Judaism is based on this covenant between God and humanity. However, if you read the Bible, Jewish Bible or Christian, God is not a very loving type of character. It's that's why it doesn't say about loving God or something like that. I mean, it does in some places, but God is saying, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to kill you. I'll execute you. And not only does he say it, it's done repeatedly in the Torah. If you pick up sticks on the Sabbath, if you're a woman and you're not a virgin when you get married, if you disrespect your father, if you celebrate Sabbath in the wrong way, even if you touch a mountain. I mean, talk about making a mountain out of a molehill. If you touch the mountain, you're executed. I mean, this is not my idea or most people's idea of a loving God. What that means to me is that this concept of God has evolved and has changed. And so I still believe that the relationship between us and the creative power in the universe is of paramount importance. And it's so important that we shouldn't be shackled to ancient concepts that no longer make sense. It's so important that we should allow that concept to evolve and to grow as it has throughout Jewish history. So my understanding, how I relate to the Ten Commandments, is what it's saying to me is that there is a power, a creative energy in this universe that is so vast and so miraculous that it caused everything to be in existence. It even generated life out of non-life. And it even allowed all the things that we see around us to evolve from one source. And it evolved us in a way that we are unique and similar and have new qualities and powers that are wondrous. And we should celebrate that and honor that and respect that and cherish this incredible creative power that gave rise to us and everything else. That's how I understand the Ten Commandments. That's how I interpret it. I do not interpret that there's somebody out there who's a dictator in the sky controlling me. But I do believe that this power, this wondrous power within us and within everyone else is sacred. And I also believe that when human beings can finally understand that the creative, wondrous power inside of me is exactly the same as that power that's inside of everyone else, even if their religion is different, even if their skin color is different, even if their language is different, even if they belong to a different political party, even if they belong to a different species, there's a creative power that's within every living thing that's unique and wondrous. And when we recognize that, then we'll be able to lead a truly religious life. But I think that if we get stuck in the past and have a concept of God from the Torah that's archaic, it prevents us from ever having this realization. And it actually causes the opposite. Instead of embracing everything and everyone else, we tend to become narrow and think that God is very narrow-minded, and it makes us narrow-minded too. Anybody want to react, disagree, agree with that?
Eric,
Go ahead, Joel.
You got to remember that the 10 Commandments were written in stone. So the intent was that they're number one, because the Torah was written on animal skin, I believe.
There you go. That's right.
So a big difference.
By the way, it's relevant today. It says, "Thou shalt not covet." So it's talking against COVID-19. It says the 10th commandment, "Thou shalt not covet," and it's telling us not to spread covet around. So it's very up to date.
That's a very good covered story.
The Torah also it goes beyond even the authoritarian, totalitarian dictatorships of the Soviet Union or of Cuba, because it punishes a thought crime. I don't know if you realize that. You're actually punished for thinking a certain thought. If you even think a thought like, "Gee, that guy has a nice house. I wish I had a house like that." Or, "Wow, that guy his wife is pretty hot. I wish I had someone like that." If you even think that, you're punished.
They have
And
ESP.
the human mind, it's hard to stop your human mind from thinking. So it's designed to make people feel guilty over things they have no control over. And it's also interesting that the 10 Commandments picks things that I don't think are the top 10. I find the top 10 to be in other places in the Torah and also other sources. For instance, the Torah says, "Don't stand idly by the blood of your neighbor." If everybody's doing something wrong, don't follow a multitude to do evil. Stand up and chastise them. Imagine if that was the law of the land during the Holocaust, or during slavery, or during countless other things that are going wrong. Imagine if that was one of the top 10 commandments. Don't stand idly by, and don't be silent in the face of evil. Those types of things. Or how about use your rational mind when you decide to choose a religion? How about, I mean, I'd like to see one of those make it to the top 10. So maybe we could have a reevaluation of it. But there are some beautiful passages in Leviticus that are very sorely needed, talking about resisting evil and standing up to evil. Anybody else want to share some thoughts on all of this?
If other people have comments, I definitely want them to say it. If not, I just wanted to respond, Rabbi, to what you had said. Anybody else planning to comment? I don't want to jump in. So it sometimes occurs that Rabbi Silver and I fundamentally disagree about important issues. This would certainly be one of them. So just in brief.
How shocking.
Just in brief, and for the record, so to speak, the reading of the 10 Commandments, I disagree with his reading of the 10 Commandments. I do not believe that the 10 Commandments should be read as if God was saying, "There are lots of gods and I just want to be the main one. Don't put any other gods before me." I can understand how the text could be read in that way. There's no doubt that's one possible way of reading the text. But I believe, and I think it's an important point, an important distinction, that the intent of the text is to say that God is saying there are no other gods. There are no other gods, and you shouldn't worship any of the gods that people have created. That's the idea of other gods. In other words, when you read into the verse that God understood that there were the other gods existed, yes, that's true, because people worship the sun and the moon and the stars and the trees and the little idols that they built. People worship those things. So God is referring to all of those things and saying all of the false gods that people create and that people worship, don't worship those things. Don't bow to them. Don't serve them. I'm the only deity. I'm the only God in the world. And I do think that's a fundamental principle of Judaism, and enunciated right here at the first of the 10 Commandments. But putting that aside, I wholeheartedly support and agree with almost everything else Rabbi Silver said. So tonight, so that's good.
Wonderful.
But that's great. That's great. Good discussion tonight.
Good.
All right.
Discussion.
Well, I do want to encourage everyone to join us on the 20th and to celebrate the historic alliance between the African American and Jewish communities that led to the civil rights movement and to a new administration today, and to try to mix it up a little bit. I also want to encourage you to watch us on Shabbat. On Shabbat, we're going to have a really wonderful service, and join us at the Zoom afterwards, because we always engage in a lot of interesting discussions. We're now engaged in discussing having a marketer to promote L'Dor Va-Dor and to take us in a new direction. And we got a lot of things coming up. So stay involved with us, keep supporting us, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Lee, I still want to hear from you. Do you have any comments you want to share with us? We haven't heard from you.
We're just pleased that you're with us tonight.
I do want to ask you a question.
Oh,
Has your son been watching anything in Spanish yet? Have you exposed him to Spanish?
No, not yet. I will soon.
All right. Well, if you plan on doing it, don't waste any time, because
Okay.
he can learn Spanish the fastest from
Right.
birth on. Once
Okay.
he's like 3 or 4, he's over the hill.
Okay.
You want to present it to him now. He's like a sponge right now. I exposed my kids to Spanish at an early age, and I can tell your kid's going to be really advanced. And if he was bilingual, that would be a tremendous advantage.
Oh yeah. So thank you for that. But I do agree with Rabbi Khan concerning the first commandment. I do agree that the Lord was saying that all the other gods, they are non-gods, and that he was aware of the exposure in Egypt, and that the Egyptians had a plethora of gods. And what he was doing was telling them that you know, those aren't gods. Like Moses clearly showed you that with his baton and with my help, we basically freed you, because those other gods weren't able to stop me from bringing you out. And I've basically showed you that they aren't gods, and that I'm the only God. And I do think that's what he was saying. And I won't say too much more. But
You made my day. You made my day.
I'm going to defer to you, Leah, and to Rabbi Khan. I'll just say this to support what you're saying. The Egyptians worship the sun god, and that sun god was called Ra, which is where I think we get the word ray, like a ray of light. And one of the plagues, the second to last, the deadliest one, was to cause darkness over Egypt. And that was to demonstrate to Egypt, your sun god is not as powerful as I am. I just shut your God down and I just caused darkness, so I'm more powerful. And you're right, the Torah is clearly saying that the Jewish God surpasses anything that anybody else could possibly come up with. Anybody else? Go ahead, Emily.
Emily.
Okay, two things. First of all, Leah, acquisition of a second language by the age of 10 opens all kinds of synapses for better mathematical development, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. I have a whole
She was a teacher.
different, yeah, old special ed.
Leah, if you get involved with
I
a
have
bunch
a
of Jewish
whole
people, they're going to
different-
tell you what to do about being a parent. That's kind of
Right.
what kind of comes with the territory.
My
You
kids
get all
are
types
far
of,
away, so I have
you're going to
to
get free unsolicited advice.
Right.
no, thank you. I accept. I need it.
I have a whole different concept of the 10 Commandments, and I know this is sacrilege, but in my mind, Moses was a great thinker, and he had a speech impediment, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So he went up on the mountain and thought, I can't say these wonderful things, but if I write them down and say they came from a supernatural power, then I will be believed and the people will follow all these wonderful things. Now, I think they're all fabulous things. I love the 10 Commandments. Do I believe that they were written by God? No, I think they were conceived by Moses with a hammer and chisel, and he was a brilliant, brilliant guy who said, this is what you should follow. Now, does it make any difference that I don't believe that it came from God if I believe that they're good things?
Well, Emily, I'm going to add to your sacrilege, because historians don't believe that Moses wrote it either. They believe that scribes wrote it hundreds or thousands of years after Moses, and then just said Moses wrote it so that people would believe it, and Moses got it from God. So the historians believe that it came many, many centuries afterwards. And there's a lot of historical reasons why they believe that, including the type of Hebrew that's used with some of the terminology that's used. But yes, don't worry about committing sacrilege around here.
But bottom line, they're all good things. So what difference does it make as long as we are good people and we follow those things within reason? As Paul said, you don't have to honor your father and mother if they're sexual abusers or druggies. You know, I mean, within reason, you should follow the 10 Commandments.
That would be good. It would be nice if the 10 Commandments actually qualified it in that way instead of making it a blanket statement, which it doesn't. That's why I don't think it came from a divine being. A divine being would have qualified it so it made sense in every situation. I think we're at the end of this discussion, and I have to go tape the Shabbat celebration so that Sharon can get it in time. I'm letting you in on a little secret. I tape it a couple of days in advance. I'm going to run up to L'Dor Va-Dor right now. Anyway, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I really appreciate Rabbi Kahn putting up with my blasphemy and my sacrilege. It's very, very understanding of him. And I thank everybody for joining us, and I thank Sharon for orchestrating this. And I look forward to seeing you in the next installment. So take care, everybody. Have a great week. And
thank you.
Remember that there is a God within everybody. There is godliness within us all, and that is a very powerful force for good. And let's use it to the max.
Thank you, rabbis. Thank you very much. Shavua Tov. Have a great week.
Tov.